So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Australian Pavilion. Welcome to Water and Gender Day, the inaugural Water and Gender Day of COP, and our session this afternoon entitled Partnerships for Future Proofing Building Inclusive Communities for Resilient Water and Wash in the Asia Pacific region. It's a fairly long title. My name is Alison Baker, and I'm the fund manager of the Australian Government funded Water for Women Fund, a flagship program aimed at improving climate resilience, health, well-being and equality through inclusive water, sanitation and hygiene. We work in 15 different countries around the Asia Pacific region, and we'll be drawing on those experiences and lessons this afternoon, as well as those of the Australian Water Partnerships. In the spirit of diverse voices and partnerships, I'm joined here today by Joanna Mott, our Gender and Social Inclusion Advisor, Mia Kuzak, our Communications Specialist, Tanvi Orza, the Climate Change Advisor for WaterAid Australia, one of the fund's partners, Catherine Cross, who's in another meeting and she'll jump out shortly, the Strategy and Partnerships Lead from the Australian Water Partnerships, and Phil Duncan, the Senior Aboriginal Consultant from Alluvium, also an AWP partner, and a proud Camilla Roy man. So welcome here, Phil, today. We'll also be hearing from a range of other diverse voices that we'll introduce as we go through this afternoon's session. But as we commence, we're very proud to acknowledge the traditional owners of our country, Australia. We also take this opportunity to acknowledge the people of Egypt and pay our respects to you all and Indigenous people globally. Today we pay respect to the elders past and present and Indigenous people around the world and those in the room with us here today. So we honour the past, respect the present, and share a vision for a prosperous and reconciled future for all. To achieve that vision, it's clear we must address together the challenges ahead that climate change is creating. A resilient future requires us to find new ways of working and finding new and innovative solutions. I think it's also pretty clear that to tackle these challenges, it does need to happen at multiple levels. We know the urgency of all the negotiations that are going on at the moment and all those political commitments that are being made. There's been lots of numerous technology solutions, water, energy, nexus, food, and a whole range of other things as I wander around. Those are really important as well. But the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation strategy, as well as a number of global frameworks, really highlight the socio-economic impacts, especially for the most climate-stressed communities around the globe. And while impacted by climate, these affected communities can also be part of the solution. And that's what we're really going to explore here today. So as the focus sort of continually shifts to action and implementation, what can we do, particularly for those most affected in the affected communities and making sure that they're part of the solution? So, firstly, just to frame our way forward, the message of collaboration has been clear in numerous COP sessions over the past week, and I'm sure continuing to go forward. We know that working in silos doesn't work anymore. We've got to break down those silos of the sectors. And through the work that we've been doing, we've very much seen that positive change that starts to emerge through alliance and partnerships. And we'll show you some working examples of that shortly. Secondly, localization of solutions. That's also been emphasized a lot over the last few days, particularly with respect to adaptation. Climate change is experienced locally, and we need to mobilize those local communities to adapt and build on their lived experience to create their own resilient futures. Still working? Oh yeah, it is. Okay. But the impacts of climate change aren't experienced equally within each community. And it's often the most marginalized in our society, such as women, people with disability, sexual and gender minorities, the poor, ethnic minorities, Indigenous peoples who are the most impacted. Yet their voices aren't heard, and they're often excluded from the tables where all the decisions are actually being made. That's what renders them vulnerable. But let's make sure that we don't just focus on the vulnerability. As Phil Duncan said the other day, in one of his talks, there's no greater intelligence about the climate impacts and footprints than in local communities. So thank you, Phil, for that. So forging those partnerships and seeking new ways to collaborate helps to bring those diverse perspectives into the picture, strengthens the prospects for creating new solutions, problem solving, to what is, as we know, the biggest challenge of our time, climate change. And for us, that's that sweet nexus where we see that transformation can actually take place and we can forge a new way forward. So what we'd like to do this afternoon is share with you some examples from our Water for Women WASH projects that serve as a foundation for building climate resilience. They support those partnerships and alliances that transform the norms that create greater equity and diversity for problem solving. And that needs to happen at sort of a personal level, a household level, a community level, and an institutional level. And we'll work through some of those examples this afternoon. And I know our AWP partnership has similar examples to share as well. So through these examples, it becomes very evident that effective water management, water security, and WASH are all foundational to climate change and really help build those inclusive communities. So the sum of all of us is much more powerful in achieving change that really is future-proof for social and climate resilience. And again, I like Phil's quotes. One that he gave on Saturday, how can we be better together? I think that sets the scene for what we're going to explore over the next little while. So we're going to look at those partnerships, how they help create inclusive and resilient communities. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Jos to start us on this journey.
Thanks. Thanks, Alison. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land of where I work and live in Melbourne, Boonwurrung country, and also to take this opportunity to pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. So thank you. And yes, as Alison said, we're really excited to take you on this journey of looking at how Water for Women partners have been building community resilience and equity through their WASH projects, and hence building community climate resilience. So let's first start with the household and community level. So social norms that sustain harmful behaviours such as gender-based violence, gender inequality, and exclusion of certain groups from community activities and from participating in society more broadly, hinder the uptake of improved WASH behaviours and practices, which in turn impacts on their health and resilience. Everyone is ill-served by social and gender inequality. We know that. The community as a whole misses out as diverse knowledge and capacities go unrecognised and undervalued for finding, and this is particularly concerning if we're looking at finding solutions to climate risks in the community today. So changing norms, i.e. not accepting business as usual, is critical for change that leads to more cohesive and resilient communities. But changing entrenched norms requires deep work. Scaling deep is about focusing on the hearts of minds of people and proactively but carefully addressing stigma, discrimination and social barriers that hold certain sections of the community back. If done well, it should complement scaling up, i.e. policies and systems, and scaling out initiatives, i.e. achieving more access for more people, indeed all people. A strong and complementary focus on all three components of scale is what makes a WASH program more sustainable and climate resilient. Indeed, it's the only way, if we truly want to make sure we are leaving no one behind in accessing WASH services and ensuring that we are supporting more resilient communities in the face of climate-related upheavals. So, we know that there's no more important place to start for norms change than in the household, where norms are first learned and shared. You'll now have the pleasure of hearing from one of our Water for Women partners, SMV Nepal, about the research they've been conducting to look at gendered norms in the household in the face of COVID. And this is important as we know that any upheaval can have an impact on gendered norms, negative or positive, or even indeed both. So I'm delighted to introduce Sabitra Dakal, the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Advisor of SMV Nepal, and Ratan Budatoki, the Program Leader for Rural Water Supply Services at SMV Nepal. Together, they'll explain to us about the impacts of the research and why it's so important for climate resilient WASH.
My name is Savitra. In SNB, we subscribe to the statement that equity and resilience in the society starts from home. Results of 2 district-level gender studies in Nepal during COVID-19 validated the importance to gain the better understanding of household dynamics to accelerate the progress in WASH. Some results include: 1. There was little improvement in women's lion's share in caregiving and domestic work, most of which are WASH-related. 2. Women exhibited lower confidence level in taking decisions at home and within the community. Our research findings provided SNB in Nepal with the evidence to inform our programmatic priorities. Research findings further influenced us to encourage and demonstrate the value of equal and respectful partnership between men and women. Further, gender equality and social inclusion, also covering disability inclusion, has become an important facet of and requirement for SNB sector programming in water, agri-food and energy.
Namaste, my name is Ratan Budatoki. Significantly, our efforts contribute to climate resilience because if we are successful in harnessing mutual respect and partnership within households, we create an environment that builds a foundation of dialogue, joint planning, and decision-making over households and community needs. When women and men work together, the responses to the climate crisis will be more encompassing of the needs of all individuals. Community support network, particularly needed in at-risk communities, will be built and reinforced. Accordingly, domestic and caregiving work becomes the responsibility of 2 or more, not simply one. This is especially important as meeting the challenges of the climate risk will require all hands on deck. As this year's COP slogan goes, we must move together for implementation.
Hi everyone, my name is Tanvi and I'm the Regional Climate Change Advisor at WaterAid Australia, and I work across the Southeast Asia and Pacific regions, and it gives me great pleasure today to talk to you about some of our work around the gender, WASH and climate nexus. So we all know that climate change will disproportionately affect women and girls, particularly due to the increased burden of household and domestic work. In the Pacific, we also see particularly high rates of violence against women, and this is often much higher than the global average. Oh yeah, sorry. So, for example, 2 out of 3 women in the Pacific experience some sort of sexual or physical violence. And of course, gender-based violence is a significant barrier to affecting climate resilience. It's difficult for women to access health services and for them to be a part of decision-making and leadership. It also significantly impacts their access to WASH, and WASH is also a very critical entry point to achieving gender issues. So if climate actors are addressing WASH, they're likely to also be addressing gender as well. So effectively addressing gender-based violence relies on strong partnerships with those with lived experiences, as well as the technical expertise to then work on prevention and response. So this includes partnerships with rights holder groups, women's organizations, groups of sexual and gender minorities, and others as well. So it's really important that we tackle these harmful norms in a do-no-harm approach. And so I want to use this opportunity to introduce some of the great work that we're doing in WaterAid Papua New Guinea through the Water for Women project. So this project is building the resilience of women through the prevention of and response to gender-based violence. It's doing this by partnering with the East Sepik Council of Women in PNG to deliver gender equality and gender-based prevention messaging through the community's WASH activities. It's also supporting the active involvement in government WASH district planning processes as well as policy development. So you'll now hear from Sophie Mangai of the East Sepik Council of Women, who will tell us a bit about her work to shift gender norms and work on gender-based violence through the project's WASH activities. Thank you.
By Appropriate Technology Community Development Institute. While originally was designed to be a women-only livelihood, ESCAO, in pursuit to encourage do not harm approach, invited and encouraged men and partners' participation in the activity. Throughout the workshop, ESCAO facilitated gender awareness raising sessions with men and women, incorporating gender-based violence messaging and women's empowerment. Men understood GBV issues and have revealed their own experience and strongly advocate prevention message among themselves during soap-making workshop. Quote from a ward member, Thomas Tallis: "I will not deny the fact that all the gender-based violence and abuse cases that we have discussed in common in the community. I want to thank you, WaterAid, for this awareness. You have set a new pathway in GBV for us to take and try and prevent and address these issues in the community."
Yeah, it's amazing how some of these partnerships can really tackle some of these really challenging areas, not just with water and wash or climate, but just sort of fundamental. But what I'd like to touch on over the next minute or two is really another important element of partnerships, which is actually brokering them. If people aren't used to working together, you often need that bit of assistance to actually figure out how do we actually work together. And if we look at sort of how we do that in terms of sort of marginalized communities, it's really understanding the voices of those marginalized communities, making sure that we're working with them in a way that doesn't do any sort of further harm to them. But we don't necessarily always know how to do that. So it's working with governments or duty bearers if they're trying to actually provide services to these marginalized communities. They actually need a bit of capacity building to help them actually understand the best way to do that. The communities or the marginalized groups themselves also need some training and capacity building in terms of how do they deal actually with those local government counterparts. They're actually responsible for delivering some of those services, but they don't know that they're actually due those services. And oftentimes the government themselves, the duty bearer, doesn't actually know how to reach those communities. So a really good example of the role that a CSO can play is the actual brokering of those partnerships. And we're working with a partner in India, SIPA, that really works to build those reciprocal relationships, those respectful relationships, so all the different parties actually understand where each other's coming from. Sorry, it was making some funny noises. So hopefully you got most of that. So just the importance of those partnerships in terms of building capacity of all the partners. And SIFA is doing a lot of that really good work, particularly looking at climate resilient sanitation, bringing together marginalized communities, bringing together duty bearers or local governments, and bringing together the private sector. And many of those people that are actually working in those sanitation spaces, actually cleaning out sludge and all those kind of things, they're often women and very much from marginalized communities. So how do you bring all those together so those individuals are actually working in a much safer and healthier spaces? And how do you connect the governments to those individuals as well, and then to the private sector and make sure that they come up to speed as well? So SIFA sort of very much sort of demonstrates that they're working very much to empower communities in a lot of those settlements. So what we're going to hear in the next couple of minutes is Akila Savadas and Ravi Kiran from SIFA, who'll explain the work that they're doing with sanitation workers, with the government, with the private sector, and with some of the community services. So I'll hand over, or maybe I can do it from here, can I? There we go. So we'll hear from Akila and Ravi in India.
In sanitation enterprises for two major reasons. Firstly, sanitary workers, many of whom are women and from less privileged groups, face huge exploitation from contractors made to do hazardous work, often with no protective gear and equipment. Secondly, because no one can drive social enterprise better than them, especially if they can collaborate with the Community Management Committee or CMC formed at the slum level to generate demand for services. Therefore, their inclusion in running sanitation enterprise has benefited government and communities. They've been contracted to run FST plants, material recovery facilities for waste management, manage toilet complexes, collect water tariff and property tax. This is proving to be both transformative and meaningful.
The partnerships between SIFA, the duty bearers, and the marginal communities we work with is important to build inclusive systems in communities because the WASH system or private sector is unable to address the complex need of marginal communities. The former is able to demonstrate readiness to catalyze inclusive WASH and build WASH infrastructure, but it is not able to address all the structural challenges on the ground. And the private sector, they are worried about not getting the margins of profit. Under these conditions, the self-help groups or the community cooperatives running sanitation enterprises not only integrating sanitation and livelihood, but also to fulfill the social development goal of gender equality and inclusive WASH. This also contributes to climate resilience. How? If the sanitation entrepreneurs are trained in strengthening adaptation and to build safe infrastructure, they will strengthen the sanitation value chain. As managers MCC, they are strengthening the government efforts to reduce GHG. Proper solid and liquid waste management will also ensure that groundwater is not contaminated, enhancing water security to contribute climate resilient WASH.
Just before we move on to the next one, I forgot a quote. As you can tell, I like my quotes. So this one's from Arundhati Roy, who's an Indian author, so it was appropriate for the conversation between Akila and Ravi. So there's really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard. I think that's really a point in statement, but really, if you don't actually believe that, and you can put things into action, then you do actually start to make sure that those voices are heard. And the work that SIFA is doing in India is really demonstrating that. So on that note, I'll hand over to Jos.
Thanks, Alison. And yes, just to echo Alison's sentiments about SIFA, they really live that quote, very much so. So now I'm taking you to partnerships for transformative leadership. So self-sustaining and equitable partnerships for change depends on transformative leadership. And transformative leadership is definitely not about business as usual. It is about working with all levers for change, including actively working against deeply entrenched norms that serve to divide rather than unite. It's about having an all-in rather than an us versus them approach. Transformative leaders have the power to change mindsets and bring about the deep change that is needed to build equality and resilience. And I'm going to talk now about our partner, SNV, of which one of our SNV colleagues has just arrived. Welcome, Sonia. So Partner SNV shows how this has been done through their Water for Women WASH projects and the transformative impacts that this has had on the lives of so many in the face of COVID pandemic. The transformative work and learning done through COVID has been foundational in how we approach adaptation to climate risks and building resilience. Keywords. So Partner SNV Bhutan recognises the importance of transformative leadership in leaving no one behind, including during the critical times of crisis. And they've worked closely with with government officials, otherwise known as duty bearers, to support the most marginalised in communities. You'll see one video out of a series of videos on transformative leaders during COVID in Nepal, Laos and Bhutan. These videos were developed by our partners, SNV, and also the Institute of Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology in Sydney. So I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Denchen Wangmo, the Minister for Health in the Government of Bhutan and also a member of the National Assembly of Bhutan. Over to you, Denchen.
Good example, my name is Denchen Wangmo. I am the current Health Minister for all Government of Bhutan and also currently serving as the President of the World Health Assembly. Health is central to the developmental agenda. If health and well-being of the population is not taken care, then I think no other developmental agendas can move forward. The recent COVID pandemic, we have ensured that we do line listing of every individual with disability, every individual who are on prescription medicine, so that if there is any disruption in the health services, that we are able to take care of the most vulnerable sector of our population. When we started quarantining people, we have never thought about distributing sanitary pads, and suddenly I realized, oh, there are a lot of women in quarantine and they have no access to sanitary pad. We ensure that all our quarantine facilities have access to sanitary pads. It was also a reflective moment for us. We as a nation now going forward must invest in our own people, building capacity and the competency of our own people. So anytime down the line in future, if we have a pandemic like this, we are at least have adequate health human resources. My health workers did not shy away from that challenge. Instead, they took upon themselves to train as many health workers as they can in managing ICU care, in delivering essential health services. So in the Southeast Asia region, probably Bhutan is the only country through the assessment done by WHO that did not have any disruption in the routine health services. I think for me personally, the biggest inspiration is His Majesty the King. We often talk about different styles of leadership and we don't talk about compassionate leadership. Being able to understand people's pain, every individual's worry, every individual's concern. I also believe in setting ambitious target. Setting ambitious target should be our normal approach. My name is Denchen and I commit to reach the unreached and serve as a voice for the voiceless. Together we can.
Wow, the power of compassionate leadership really can't be underestimated, and especially in times of crisis. It's what we need now more than ever. So duty bearers who are supported to think and act in transformative ways are more likely to find ways to make WASH systems more inclusive and to ensure the voices of the marginalised are represented in decision making. And we know that inclusive systems lead to inclusive services. Having the voices of user groups in decision making, planning and policy development will more likely ensure WASH services meet the diverse needs in more appropriate ways. In the face of climate change, this is critical. Resilience is compromised if people cannot access the wash services they need. In climate stressed areas or after climate hazards, marginalised people will be more heavily impacted in wash systems if wash systems do not accommodate their interests and needs. And again, we have another example from partner SNV Bhutan, who are working with duty bearers, government officials, and their disability partners, rights holder organisations, to ensure the interests, rights and needs of people with disabilities are represented in WASH systems and therefore reflected in WASH services. So I'm very pleased again to introduce Ugyen Wangchuk, who is the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Advisor for WASH with our partner SMV Bhutan, and he will explain how they are doing this. Thank you.
It is important to have representation of people with disabilities in WASH systems because they are the ones who knows the issues and challenges they face, so they are able to suggest the necessary support and appropriate solutions. They will be empowered by being able to speak up for themselves. SNB supports the inclusion of people with disabilities in WASH by involving them in the creation of policies, plans, guidelines, and communication materials, including the development of program planning, decision making, and execution. The partnerships between SNV and the OPDs we work with is important for building inclusive systems because they are the right holder organizations with extensive networks of people with disabilities, knowledge of disability inclusion, and local expertise in climate resilient WASH services and adaptation strategies. This contributes to climate resilience by designing suitable interventions and adaptive methods can take disability issues and challenges into account.
It is important.
Thank you. Yeah, so really talking to that, the importance of that partnership with rights holder organisations, and in this case, with organisations of people with disabilities, because of their lived experience and also because of their expertise, and just the richness of that partnership, how critical it is for climate resilient WASH. Okay, now we're turning to system strengthening and the importance of monitoring. So regular monitoring is an important part of any good system, as we know. Monitoring processes are critical to understanding risks and pathways to resilience. Without monitoring, we can't understand the issues on the ground and what needs to change to manage risks and support adaptive practices to strengthen equity and resilience. But as we've been talking about over this session, certain people and groups are often invisible in these processes due to the very systemic nature of their marginalisation. And so, unsurprisingly, don't get counted in monitoring processes. Bringing diverse representation in systems means thinking intentionally about processes. Ensuring diversity is reflected on monitoring teams is one way of ensuring that marginalised segments of the community are not only seen but also counted in WASH interventions. So now we have the pleasure of hearing from Wayu Triyayudi, who is the Senior WASH Advisor from Water for Women WASH Partner Plan Indonesia, who will tell us how this is being done through their work in supporting government processes and community-led total sanitation in eastern Indonesia. Thanks, Wahu.
Important to have right holder representation in government WASH monitoring process because we want to ensure that all marginalized groups, particularly women, girls, and people with disabilities, are represented in the monitoring process. with the participation of right holder organizations in the monitoring process, they can speak on behalf of the marginalized groups in regard to how the project outputs give or do not give benefits for women, girls, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups. In Indonesia, this process has achieved the following benefits for government and communities. Firstly, district government in planned international project areas are able to demonstrate how to apply inclusive approach in monitoring the progress of WAS projects. Secondly, such learning from district level is being disseminated widely for further replications by other district governments and by the national government in order to promote inclusive WAS approach on a larger scale. And thirdly, marginalized groups have increased confidence and agency in having a say about their WAS issues. The partnership between Plan International, the government, and the right holder organization we work with is important for building inclusive systems and communities in Indonesia. This is because through the WAS project, we created a platform for CSOs, government agencies, and right holder organizations to sit together and make decisions in regard to inclusive access to WAS services. This contributes to climate resilience by reducing the vulnerabilities of marginalized groups from the impact of climate hazards on WAS services. As we all know that when WAS services are interrupted due to climate hazard events, marginalized groups feel more burdened than the rest of community members. Having diverse perspectives during the WAS monitoring process will give an opportunity for the government to have inputs from marginalized groups on how to improve WAS services to be more resilient to climate hazards from their perspective.
The research.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Cross, and I work for the Australian Water Partnership. We just heard in the last video the importance of partnerships to deliver water services. So partnership is not just a word to make us feel good. It's about what we're doing. It's to improve access to clean water in developing countries. It's of course about working together, but also about building trust, mutual understanding, and coming to cooperative relationships in a spirit of respect, humility, and equality. Here at this COP, we hear about many complex problems, such as addressing climate change through water management, which is sensitive to development standards. This includes around gender equality, disability, and social inclusion. And it requires not just technical solutions. There's a need for people from different backgrounds to work together in partnership to come up with collaborative, innovative, and adaptive approaches. At the same time, partners need to connect across scales. They need to connect from source to sea, from catchment to tap, across the water value chain, because what's happening upstream will impact downstream. So intensified farming can affect water quality, and downstream pressures, such as increasing water demands from industrial and domestic use, can drive how the catchment is managed. Inclusive and partnerships are essential for these systems to be managed appropriately. And this includes working in partnership with local, traditional, indigenous, and gendered understandings of water resource management, land and soils, and even climate adaptation. To plan for a climate resilient future, a whole of community approach to water governance and stewardship is essential. This needs everyone, all of us, to critically analyze the situation and understand the actual impacts of climate hazards and take collective action together to manage these risks. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the next video. This is on community to catchment planning for inclusive climate resilient wash systems in the Solomon Islands. This is a partnership between the Solomon Islands National University, as well as Water for Women and AWP partner International Water Centre, along with Plan International Australia. And what they've done is they've conducted research for effective community management of water and wash and developed localized participatory approaches for integrated water and wash planning. So we'll hear from some colleagues on what these whole of community processes involve, how inclusive partnership works. and why it's so important for climate resilient wash in communities.
Project aims to raise the importance of understanding the water catchment area, how it connects, where people's water comes from, importance of protecting the resource, whether visible at the surface or invisible under our feet.
So the imaging work of the research project looks at enhancing the existing approach of CVC to improve sustainability, inclusiveness, and opportunity to plan for future scenarios. This means consideration into past and current challenges as well as future scenarios. This approach tends to re-engage communities to motivate action planning for climate change through shared stories, ideas from other communities and places in Solomon Islands as well as the Pacific Islands. And also it helps increase the knowledge around impacts of climate change, the likely future hazards, what vulnerable and resilient water system may look like through workshops. And it helps communities think about what future hazards are there and how they can affect their individual water supply systems, people's well-being, and the wider catchment systems. So this approach aims to instill number one, future is important. Number two, planning for future scenarios ensures no regrets, actions now. Number three, it requires a collective action. Everyone has responsibilities. And number four, water for everyone is important.
In addition to the water action planning process, which is based more on water supply protection at the community level, there need to be a more holistic approach to protect catchment level water resource management and water stewardship. The main idea here is with everything that is happening within the catchment, both man-made and natural fresh water quality and quantity is being compromised. So how can we keep it safe? Well, by using photography and photo voice to document, discuss the current state of health of their water source and catchment, communities have a platform to discuss environmental change that has happened over their lifetime, as well as their concern, future aspirations for their catchment. By discussing with other communities, they have a platform to reflect on the connections between themselves and their environment and with others in the catchment. This process aims to engender water stewardship through bringing communities together to consider that water is everyone's responsibility and to discuss individual and collective actions they can take to conserve, to protect, and regenerate their water resources.
I think that's just such a beautiful video that really covers so many different things. I'm not going to try and even comment on it or summarize it by any means, but it just shows when you bring different partners together, their different experiences working with the communities, they can actually work out ways to be climate resilient. And sort of working on that same theme, I'd now like to invite up Phil Duncan to continue to expand on that idea. What kind of partnerships can we actually create so that we're actually really bringing in that local Indigenous knowledge as we find solutions to climate resilience? So over to you, Phil.
Marabu Allison. Being the father of four daughters, and I am my mother's son, so I want to say thank you for allowing me to support you. In New South Wales, I'll use that as an example. There are 64 discrete Aboriginal communities, is what they're called now. There's 64 former missions and reserves that have no infrastructure that provides water fit for purpose. Water that is clean water, delivered at the right time, the right way, and the right quality, for quality of life, longevity of life. And what we are seeing with those 64 communities is a greater uptake of leadership and responsibility in the negotiations from our female leaders and women in our community. They are at the table negotiating and co-designing what that infrastructure looks like. The New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council, it's the water and sewage infrastructure program that was an extension of the Aboriginal Communities Development Program, which was a $350 million infrastructure, housing and development project. But I want to loop back to collaboration within the Indigenous communities and a greater leadership being shown, but support across the community for that voices and the position that women have taken. The New South Wales Land Council committed $100 million over a period of time. That's their money, it's not government money, and the government treasury matched that with dollar for dollar. What we are seeing is infrastructure that is now being designed and being implemented that is fit for purpose for those communities. And what the women have been able to negotiate was building the capacity and the skills base in those communities, and the men are taking a lead role in the construction and the maintenance of that infrastructure. It's a partnership and a collaboration that didn't come about easy. In Aboriginal society in New South Wales, where I'm significantly experienced in, it's always been a male-dominated voice or position. And the transition to allow what I would call better negotiators that have an understanding of the need of family, that keep our families together, that keep our communities together, is there for every, and testimony of that is the success of that water and sewage infrastructure program that is delivered by the Water Infrastructure New South Wales. But I want to say it hasn't been easy. And some people might not like what I've got to say, but it's the truth. That in Aboriginal society, we as men, a lot of men have been perpetrators of lateral violence, bullying and intimidation, and not allowing the opportunity for our women and our women's voices and that leadership to take place. Happily to say that transition is now in front of everybody's eyes to see. Resilient communities, infrastructure that delivers water fit for purpose, quality water delivered the right way at the right time, that has had an impact on quality of life and longevity of life. And you don't need to stand here, I'm not standing here telling you any mistruths. You only need to go to the New South Wales website, government website, the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council website, and it's there in front of you to see. So the change of leadership never comes easy. But, we need to think about that holistic approach, and we also need to think about the transgenerational change of leadership. Because one thing about Aboriginal society is a changing of the guard. And I believe that our women facilitate that process a lot better than what we do as men. And I'm happy to discuss my position with anybody that wants to challenge me on the position or the statements that I made today. But I stand proud to be with you, and thank you for inviting me to speak. And I hope that I've given a message that a missing voice in the water debate, in our community's development debate, and our strategy and our vision going forward is the female voice. And I say your name.
Thank you very much, Phil, for your honesty and for really putting out there those challenges that we do have to face within all our communities, but there is a way through. And I think that's the message that we want to carry through this whole thing, is there are things that we actually can do to create that change. But we just have a couple more examples that we want to share with you, very similar to some of the things you've touched on, Phil. Tanvi's just going to share a couple of experiences from Papua New Guinea in a similar space. How do you make sure that you bring in those local voices?
Success. So thanks, Alison. I want to take this opportunity to present another case study of some work we're doing around climate resilient wash in Papua New Guinea. And this really focuses on bringing together different data sources to really inform holistic water resource management. So the first part of that is working with communities to understand their traditional knowledge and their lived experiences around climate change and water resource management. And this, of course, includes understanding the unique voices of women and girls who are the custodians of water and caregivers of community. And to do that, we've developed a number of different tools that have actually been co-designed with marginalised communities in Timor-Leste, and they've now been adapted to suit the Papua New Guinea context. So this includes activities like mapping out the community's water resources, working with the community to understand who does what and who decides during climate extremes, as well as understanding those power dynamics at the household level around WASH. And then the other side is actually working on that quantitative data. So Papua New Guinea has a distinct lack of reliable climate and rainfall data that can be used for reliable and meaningful water resource management. So what we've done is we've formed a partnership with the National Weather Service at both the national and subnational level. And we've actually installed a weather station and are now working on building the capacity of subnational and national staff around the operation and maintenance of that weather station, as well as making sure that that data is being linked into the national data monitoring platforms. So now we actually have a localized rainfall data source that can be used to verify some of those global data sets, as well as feed into some more sophisticated water and catchment modeling around demand and supply, as well as identifying other alternative water resources. So it's really important that we bring together these different sets of evidence, which are equally important forms of knowledge, and use those to inform holistic water resource management and improved infrastructure designs. Another initiative that we're working on currently is developing a community-led rainfall monitoring program. So we've actually procured a number of different weather stations, little rain gauges that we've installed at different places in the community. And the idea is that we want to raise awareness around the importance of rainfall data and how that affects community water resources to really drive some of those more water conservation and sustainable water behaviours. So as you can see, we are approaching these issues through different partnerships at the national, subnational level, with the community, as well as with rights holder groups, as you saw earlier. So it really emphasises the importance of partnerships to achieve sustainability, to achieve climate resilient wash, and also bring in the water resource management sector together. So with that, I might hand back to Alison to wrap up.
Thank you very much, Tanvi, and I'm just going to give Catherine a quick minute because we've been talking a lot about WASH. You've introduced the water resource and water management side of it, and I want Catherine to have that chance. That'll be our final example.
Very quickly, so Tammy just mentioned the concept of partnerships to make change. So an example of partnership which links WASH and water resource management is with the Water Utility Improvement Program, which is a twinning between Australian utilities and those in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And this has been with the Australian Water Association. So there's been lots of different focus areas from managing climatic extremes, wastewater management, and so on. And there's been successful support on areas such as asset management, leak detection, financial management, and digitalization. There's lots of good knowledge exchange. But what was probably most challenging was to incorporate change making gender equity and social inclusion practices. And this was especially challenging to overcome poor workplace practices, poor consultative mechanisms, and blinkered decision making, or even just access to toilets. So a successful response that has started to make a difference through this knowledge exchange, through this partnership between Australian utilities and those across Southeast Asia, included a lot of storytelling, sharing of experiences, which encouraged and demonstrated a stronger role for women in the workplace, an appreciation of the knowledge they brought to solving the big problems. And so there has been demonstrated change that is slowly happening in some of these utilities. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. I hope sort of through this whole journey, I know we've covered a lot of ground in the last almost an hour. We've touched on households, communities, systems, water sanitation, water resources. But what I'm hoping the message that we've actually given you is there are things that we can all do. And there are ways that we can actually bring all those sort of marginalized communities into those discussions, the real value of partnership and the importance of those partnerships so that we each actually understand our different perspectives and we bring all those different perspectives together to find those solutions. But most importantly, the communities that are actually impacted most are actually a part of that and an integral part of that. They're central to that. They might get a bit of support from other people with a bit of data or some processes, but they're actually central to their own future. And I think as we look at climate resilience, that's something we have to do more and more. It is time to actually act. It's not necessarily easy work, as Phil has said, but if we do take some of that intentional focus and really focus on those marginalized communities, the sort of the most affected by those communities affected by climate change, there are things that we actually can do. And that really actually unpacks a whole bunch. That's not very good English or very technical or high level, but there's a whole range of different things that we can actually do. I always think you build a house on a foundation and you start to unpack and change those things, and you've got a foundation from which to grow and actually take forward. So I hope we've given you a sense of that, the importance of bringing those diverse voices in. There was a lot of diverse voices that we heard from today here on the screen, but sort of through the fund, we've been exploring a lot of those different examples, as has the Australian water partnerships, and I think we've really seen the importance and the value of water sanitation and water security as that real foundation to climate resilience as well. So I'm going to finish there. I'm going to give my other four a chance to say 2 or 3 words, if you can, just to sort of say something that you would actually like to leave us with here today. And so we're sort of right on time, but we're happy to stay around and answer any questions that you may have. So I'll start with you, Tanvi. Just a couple of very quick words. Can't be more than 30 seconds.
30 seconds. All right. Thanks, Alison. So I think what we've all taken away from here is really the importance of partnerships and working at multiple different levels. So really approaching the problem through different angles. So like I said before, subnational, national, community, rights holder groups, and making sure that we're not just treating women's and girls and other marginalized groups as just voices and voices that need to be heard, but actually acknowledging their unique contribution as those custodians of water and caregivers of a community. So they really have an important role and we can learn a lot from them. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would have to very much agree with Tanvi. It really is the power of partnerships, and yeah, on all those different levels, but what it can achieve. And I think there has been comments about that it is, hard work. It is on one level, but as Alison said, on other levels it's not. And I think through this session, hopefully we've shown you the array of partnerships and the real importance of intentional thinking around those partnerships, and the reciprocity of those partnerships, that it's really a two-way, mutually beneficial way of operating, and between the rights holder organisations, for example, and the government and the CSOs, the WASH CSOs, and how both can learn from each other to achieve climate resilient WASH and also broader gender equality and social inclusion outcomes. Thank you.
Thanks, Joss. Catherine?
Good luck. Building on what previous speakers have said, I mean, in order to deliver water and sanitation, to do effective water resource management, you have to have partnerships. You're working across scales. In a catchment, you're working from the source down to the sea. It requires so many different stakeholders, so many different perspectives. You cannot do this without partnerships, without having a multidisciplinary approach. And probably what's also important is transparency, like being able to communicate with each other and being able to build the trust to do that. So I'll end there and hand over back to Alison.
He's got shy for probably the first time in his life.
Not not shy, just hope you heard what I said because it's the truth. We as men have got to stand firm in our commitment to the women in our lives and the women in our communities. And that's all I want to say. Other than that, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of your wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Anything you want to add, Sonia? She came in at the last minute. SNV is a very important partner in the Water for Women Fund, but you need to keep it short. Sorry.
And welcome.
Thank you, and I apologize for coming in late. We had a session in a different pavilion that I was moderating also. I think the only thing I want to add is that, of course, forging these partnerships takes time and a long breath, and progress in the beginning might not always be very obvious at once. So we want to appreciate also the long-lasting support to be able to do that and not to give up if the first progress report doesn't show the most craziest and best figures. And I think there's a lot of mutual appreciation. I thank you for showing our work, and we also appreciate that we are able to do that with a long-lasting collaboration that we have. So that's from my side.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, I hope you've taken something away from that, and look forward to chatting afterwards. So thank you.